Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending this NENA Ignite session. We have a number of people today that are going to speak about interoperability. It's a key topic that people speak about often in Next-Gen 9-1-1. We're going to cover some topics in the broad sense of the Next-Gen 9-1-1 Interoperability Oversight Commission and the activities associated with that. We have several presenters today. All the people that we're speaking to here are commissioners on the Next-Gen 9-1-1 Interoperability Oversight Commission. And Rick and others will speak to some of the details with that commission. But our presenters today, I'm Steve McMurrer. I'm the moderator for this session. I'm from Fairfax County. I'm the 911 System Administrator. First up after me is going to be Rick Blackwell. He's the 911 Director from Greenville County, South Carolina. We also have Jeff Wittek, the Chief of Staff from Motorola Solutions. We also have Dave Sehnert, the Director of Innovation Integration from Mission Critical Partners. Each of them are going to talk about some aspect of interoperability and some items that you maybe don't always hear much about. Hopefully by the end of today's session, you'll have a better understanding of some things that are going on for Next-Gen 9-1-1. With that, I'm going to pass the baton to Rick Blackwell. Rick, go ahead.
So the NG9-1-1 Interoperability Oversight Commission, the NIOC, I get the task of telling y'all what we're about with the NIOC. So exactly how do you pronounce NIOC? How do you say it? Well, so we settled in on NIOC, and you see the visual representation for how you say it. We debated a long time about how are folks going to say NIOC. We wondered if they'd say NIOC, but we sort of settled in that folks were going to say NIOC. So NIOC stands for what? Well, if you Google NIOC, what you're going to get, you might see the Navy Information Operations Command. This one's a good one. You might see the National Iranian Oil Company if you look for NIOC. But keep going till you find NG9-1 Interoperability Oversight Commission. The name was picked by the NENA board. We think that they wanted a name that was descriptive of what the commission was about. So what is the commission about? Who or what is NIOC? Well, the NIOC is an independent, transparent, revenue-neutral organization that's established to oversee security and interoperability in NG9-1 communications of the PCA, the PSAP Credentialing Agency, and the Forest Guide. Now, what I'd like for you to draw from this slide in particular is pay attention to those words: independent, transparent, and revenue neutral. Because even though NENA contributed heavily to getting the commission up and running, we think that it's prudent that the commission operates autonomously. Independent, transparent, and revenue neutral are all basic tenets of what the commission is about. And we're all volunteers. We don't have any interest in making money off the NIOC. So why was the NIOC created? We've already touched on it: to oversee the operational elements required for the nationwide interoperability as per the NENA I3 standards. Somebody had to set up a PCA and a Forest Guide. And you already heard me mention about NENA getting us going. And you kind of got to brag on them, because way back in 2013, 2014, I was on the Forest Guide working group. And I can remember wondering way back then, who's going to do all this and how's this going to work? And finally, here it comes. NENA has stepped up to the plate, and we're getting going. Now, another reason NIOC created, you think about it, it's operationally and cost efficient to have one entity oversee and maintain the PCA and the Forest Guide. The PCA establishes security and trust in NG9-1-1 data transmissions, and we needed that specifically for 911 data. And the forest guide is needed in order to ensure NG9-1-1 to NG9-1 system interoperability. So absent the PKI, there's no trusted communication among NG9-1 systems. And absent the forest guide, there's no complete interoperability among those systems in that jurisdiction. Jeff's going to talk more about the PCA and the PKI later, and you'll begin to understand why that's so important. And Dave's going to talk about the forest guide, and you'll see why that's important. So you'd probably want to know who the NIAC represents. You can see over on the left, the NG9-1 Interoperability Commission, the NIAC, consists of members nominated from a variety of representative stakeholder groups that are affected by PSA and forest guide. You can read all that, but look around the chart, okay? You'll see in red, there are 10 voting seats, okay? Those are represented by the red ones. And there's actually 4 non-voting, those are represented by the blue ones. And NENA board, when it was setting up the NIAC, it solicited representatives from everywhere. That's the variety of representative stakeholder groups. And they approved the nominations to the NIAC, and we operate under established bylaws. Now, you see Canada, and I'm gonna go ahead and tell you who all's on this board. Canada in particular is very interesting because they're further ahead in a nationwide implementation of PCA and forest guide than we are. But you see David Firth is on there from the FCC, Laura Flaherty is on there from the National 911 Office, and Michelle Murray is from CRTC, the Canadian RTC. And they're all, the 3 of them are on this advisory capacity, and they help us a bunch. Move down there to the right side and you see Dara Panconi, Washington County Sheriff's Office is representing PSAPs and ECCs. Maria Jacks is the 911 Director for State of Maine. She's got state, provincial, and 911 authorities. You've heard from Steve, he's local, regional 911 authorities. He's the systems administrator for Fairfax County. You see Irene Fernando, she represents elected officials from Hennepin County, Minnesota. And that one's very interesting because she doesn't really know anything about 911, but she's over the 911 agency there in Hennepin County. I didn't say that correctly. She's an elected person that's over that. So she brings an entirely different perspective than many of us on the board that are close with 911. Dave Sehnert's representing the NENA board. He's with the Mission Critical Partners. Steve O'Connor is representing the Core Services Committee of NENA. And the Core Services folks are brilliant. I mean, that's where the real nerds of NENA reside there in Core Services. And I'm here representing the NENA Development Steering Council. Doug Cunningham's representing the core service providers. He's with CenturyLink. Jeff Wittek, you're going to hear from him in just a little bit. Commercial end user products providers. He's with Motorola Solutions. And Chris Zuniga, I always mispronounce Chris's name, Kings County Sheriff in California. He represents public safety associations. So those are the people that are on the NIAC. Wanted to go ahead and put this slide in here so you can sort of see. It represents very generically what we're about. You got the NIAC at the top. You got a dotted line relationship with the NENA board. Dotted line relationship with NENA giving us forest guide administration support. And the various NENA standards development groups are helping us because some of this stuff is really deep, but those are dotted line relationships. And the NIAC is actually over the PCA, the PSAP Credentialing Agency, the forest guide, and others. And then finally, here's the website. It's https://ng911ilc.org. You can go to it, read all about us. In the interest of transparency, we're going to continue adding to that website. We want folks to know what we're doing, and we're very open about what we're doing. So I'd encourage you that as time goes on, go there and check us out. Now, smarter folks than me are going to tell you all about the PCA and the forest guide. So I think Jeff Wittek is coming on to talk about PCA and PKI.
Thanks, Rick. Good afternoon, everybody. As Rick said, I'm Jeff Wittek, Chief of Staff for Motorola Solutions Emergency Call Handling, and on the NIAC, I represent end user product providers. Before we get started and talk about how PKI and PCA works, I think it's important, you know, there's a lot of discussion. People talk about PKI and PCA. We want to make sure that everyone understands what really are we talking about. A PKI is a public key infrastructure and is a set of roles, policies, hardware, software, and procedures that are required for communications security. Now, many of you know PKI, the concept of a public key infrastructure, is not unique to 911. There's actually a public key infrastructure within the internet as well. But in this case, in NG9-1-1, the PKI is needed for secure interjurisdiction interoperability. So in fact, the PKI is essential for secure interoperability and works hand in hand with the forest guide that Dave Sehnert is going to talk about a little bit later. The PKI creates security by establishing and managing what is commonly known in PKI speak as a chain of trust through the creation and management of certificates. Certificates are created and managed by a credentialing authority. And again, as I said, the PKI is similar to the chain of trust in the public internet. But as we speak about it today, we're going to talk more on a limited basis about the NG9-1-1 technology. A key aspect of the PKI is this thing called a PCA. And the PCA is the PSAP Credentialing Agency. That agency is the root CA, the root credentialing authority for NG9-1-1. The PCA is the root of trust in the chain of trust. And you're going to see how all of this fits together in a moment on a later slide. The PCA, or the PSAP Credentialing Agency, issues root certificates, and it issues those certificates to credentialing authorities in the chain of trust. The PCA is required, it is a required NENA I3 functional element. It's actually identified in the NENA I3 standard, and it's an integral component. So here's a representation of the chain of trust. At the chain of trust is made up of governance, number 1, technology, number 2, and operations. But the actual elements within the chain of trust is there is a root CA, that's the PCA. There are independent credentialing authorities. So for instance, the root CA can deliver the root certificate to an ICA, The ICA then delivers certificates to a host. That host can be a 911 authority, and the host then delivers certificates to individual clients. There's an important aspect, should go back. There's an important aspect of the chain of trust within the governance element, and it's called the certificate policy. You see it up here under number 1. So what is that certificate policy? The certificate policy is probably the most important part of a public key infrastructure. The certificate policy describes how certificates are issued, who gets one, how certificates are revoked or suspended, how long certificates are valid, what the chain of trust looks like, and even more. The certificate policy, it's effectively the founding document that's sort of like the Constitution to the PKI. It is a very firm set of bylaws. In order to have a PKI, you must have a certificate policy. And all of the entities that work within the public key infrastructure must agree to that certificate policy. All credentialing authorities and independent credentialing authorities must honor the certificate policy and the certificates that are issued. So takeaway here is the certificate policy is a critically important document to the PKI. How is the security maintained? The root CA, or in the case of 911, that would be the PCA, the PSAP Credentialing Authority, issues certificates to an intermediate credentialing authority. Every certificate is signed, created, with a set of random numbers called a private key. That key is kept secret. Anyone that steals the private key can pretend they are you. So those keys are kept very secretively. If the private key is compromised, the certificate must be revoked. If the root certificate is compromised, the entire PKI is compromised. For this reason, the credentialing authority private key is typically stored offline in a physical vault on special secured hardware. What happens is the root certificate is issued from the root CA or PCA to an intermediate CA. Think of the intermediate CA could be at a state level. So the PCA could issue it to a state CA. The state CA can issue it to a host CA. The host CA could be a 911 agency. And the 911 agency then issues it to one of the physical end units. That's how the chain of trust works, and that's how the security is maintained. Now, you could ask, could there be more than one root CA? And the answer is yes, in fact, there will be. An example of that would be We here in the US will have a root CA that's called the PCA or PSAP Credentialing Authority. But in Canada, they will have at least one root CA. And we can work together. We can extend trust between the United States and Canada by co-signing a certificate. So we will sign a certificate that will be issued between the United States and Canada. Now that seems very simple. It seems like a very simple concept, and it really is. But even though it's a simple concept, it has some really significant implications. By cross-signing a root CA, when we in the United States and Canada make that cross-signing, what it means is we here in the United States accept all of the members of the CA in Canada, and we accept that they are trusted. That's a very big implication, because we're not going to go to Canada and confirm that every one of those agencies are trusted. Canada is going to confirm their agencies, and we in the United States, by cross-signing, are therefore accepting their confirmation. Canada does the same thing for us. So the cross-signing has significant implication. And when we cross-sign, we are trusting that none of the Canadian agencies are going to do harm to our PKI. We are honoring the certificate from Canada. So again, while it's a simple concept, that honoring of certification has very significant implications. But again, it can be done, it will be done, and it will allow secure cross-border interoperability communications between the US and Canada. So what's the status of the PCA? Because Rick has already said, you know, the NIOC has been stood up. We're working on the PCA. We're also working on the Forest Guide, which Dave Sehnert will talk about later. From a PCA perspective, an RFP was released by NENA in June of 2019. And what that RFP did was solicit competitive proposals for the PCA. Responses were received. They were formally reviewed by a team of subject matter experts. And that team recommended an award. Recommended an award be received by a particular vendor. That whole procurement and review process was then re-reviewed by the NIOC. And we reviewed it to ensure that all of the processes that were used were of the highest integrity. Based on the NIOC's review, an award was then made to a company called DigiCert and to Ionti. DigiCert is right now in the process of hardware implementation. In parallel to that, the NIOC, along with DigiCert and along with NG Core Service subject matter experts produced and are critically reviewing the certificate policy, that incredibly important policy. That is in process right now, and we hope to have that finalized soon. In summary, trust is critical in NG9-1-1 interoperability. The PKI promotes security by establishing that chain of trust that I talked about. And the PKI contributes to interoperability by helping to facilitate things like call transfers between ESI nets or facilitate element queries among different ESI nets. I'm not going to go into great detail here, but as I said, a PKI is not unique to NG9-1-1. A PKI exists in the public internet. And this slide, which you will be able to review at your leisure, describes how that all occurs. The browsers on your computer contain the necessary certificates for the PKI. The same will be true in an NG9-1-1 environment. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Dave Sehnert.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, everyone, for your interest in this important issue regarding interoperability and how the NG9-1-1 Interoperability Oversight Commission is going to help lead this industry and really driving interoperability through a standards-based model. So the Forest Guide plays a critical part and a critical role within the overall I3 architecture, and it's also, as pointed out in the third bullet point here, and it's based on an Internet Engineering Task Force standard. So what the Forest Guide is going to provide is ultimately it's going to provide that routing instruction when there's disparate NG9-1 jurisdictions. We'll go over kind of the use cases in just a moment. It's designed ultimately to resolve those queries when there's no destination for a location. So we've all probably either heard or maybe even experienced where a concerned son has called 911 because his mother is ill or has fallen a couple states over. And that 911 call, of course, routes there locally. And then it takes a lot of troubleshooting by that telecommunicator to get that call to the right 911 center so that a response can be made. The Forest Guide is going to help resolve this situation. And so that one single call is made, the telecommunicator does not have to worry about troubleshooting. They don't have to have a major directory of all these different numbers. It's going to be an instantaneous, effectively an instantaneous query and resolution of where that call needs to be routed. Ultimately, the industry envisions this network of forest guides to provide for routing of that call, determination of that, where that call needs to be routed, both domestically as well as globally. Let's first start with, to gain an understanding of how this is going to work, let's first start with how geospatial routing occurs within a NENA I3 environment. What we have here on the left-hand side of this screen are three jurisdictions. You have your yellow, your red, and your green jurisdictions. And when a call occurs in that yellow jurisdiction, a query to the ECRF is made, and the ECRF plots that location. It sees that it sits within that yellow jurisdiction, and it routes that call to PSAP 3. Same thing for the red jurisdiction and green jurisdiction. ECRF knows those jurisdictional boundaries and the geospatial information within each of those within each of those jurisdictions, and is able to route that call to those. But what happens in situations where, again, where that call is located outside of the understanding of the ECRF? And that's where the forest guide comes into play. And that's routing between the more bigger jurisdictions, the big J. So in this particular example, that call is located outside of the service area. It's, the call is being made in this white space, this unknown space here. ECRF does not have understanding of it. It only has understanding of, in this case, of Oregon. So what happens is when that query fails, it consults the forest guide. The forest guide then takes that location and says, oh, I need to go to the ECRF for California. California is able to then determine the URI for that destination based on the location of that caller. Now, similar to what Jeff explained earlier, it's envisioned that there'll be this forest guide network, and United States and Canada would kind of marry our forest guides. We would have an understanding and interoperability between our forest guides, so that if a call occurs and is routed to a United States ESI net, but that location is actually of a caller in Canada, the query would go to that ECRF. It's not going to find that location within that ECRF, so it's going to consult the forest guide. Forest guide's going to say, you know, I don't know exactly where that is, but this forest guide over here within Canada does have understanding. It's going to be able to determine which ECRF that location belongs to, and determine, and then be able to send that to the PSAP that corresponds with that location. Now, when we look at this in a global setting, this could be a European forest guide that it resolves to, or a Mexican forest guide that it resolves to, or an Asian forest guide that it resolves to. There's going to be multiple forest guides across the world that will be all standards based in utilizing a network of forest guides, so that one call is made and the location in which that, the route in which that call needs to be made can be identified, and that call can be delivered. So what's the status of the forest guide? Well, an RFP is under development. The NIAC is going to solicit review of that RFP by subject matter experts to ensure that it has a complete and thorough set of requirements. That RFP is anticipated for release later this year. And then once that proposals are returned from the vendors, the RFP review process will be an open and transparent process, similar to what was used by the PCA. We'll be utilizing common industry best practices to ensure that it's a thorough and thorough process to ensure that the proper vendor is selected.
Okay, Dave, thank you for that. Dave, Jeff, and Rick, thank you for going over those topics. This is a summary slide. There's a lot of additional information, and we could have spent many more slides talking about each particular topic, but I wanted to review briefly what have we discussed today. We've tried to point out to you who the NIAC is and what's its governance role in support of Next-Gen 9-1 interoperability. So to summarize it, it's a diverse organization, it's independent, it's intended to be revenue neutral, and as a commission, it's acting in a transparent oversight role for NG9-1-1 security functions and interoperability. That's what the NIAC is and why it has that governance role. The purposes of the PCA and the PKI, Jeff went through that in some detail. It's been communicated, there is a need for trust within Next-Gen 9-1-1. There is a need for enhanced security and interoperability among disparate next-gen 911 system implementations. We don't want to have a series of silos of ESINET's next-gen core services implemented around the country without full trust between them. So the purpose of the PCA and the PKI is to knit those together so that trust can be built and trust will exist between these next-gen 911 system implementations. And we also discussed the forest guide. You know, where is it and how does it operate? And because calls don't always go exactly where you might expect, there are cases where a call needs to be routed automatically, and the forest guide is intended by the standards to move those 911 calls quickly to the correct PSAP. And it's envisioned to be done domestically, and it's also set up so that it can work between countries. Those are the key points that were driven home today. We hope that you've understood those. There is additional information that is available. These slides will be available through the Ignite presentation process, and we would welcome you to go to these resources that we've identified here. So the Commission has its website, which Rick spoke to. On that website, there's an additional webinar that had been created that goes into much more detail on what a PKI is. And you can click on that link from the NIAC website and learn more about a PKI than probably you would ever want to know. The bylaws for the Commission are also on the website. And of course, the NENA I3 standards undergirds all of the discussion that we've been speaking to. We did not go through these key terms in great detail. In some cases, we didn't even mention them. In a few cases, they were mentioned on a slide. But the idea of PKI and PCA has a lot of technical terms. We've defined them here briefly for you so that they're a resource for you if you decide to go back and review this presentation within your agency. But as we've indicated, there are additional places where these terms will be further developed, and when the certificate policy is finalized, as Jeff said, in the near future, the full details of the certificate policy, which is about a 100-page document, will be available for public review. And these terms are defined within that policy, and you'll see where they are used in actual implementation. So we've covered a broad range of topics from an organizational standpoint, and then some technical details about implementing next-gen 911 functional elements, the PCA, the PKI, and the forest guide. We're pretty sure that you're going to have some questions, and we're standing by to go through the questions that you've submitted during this presentation, and we look forward to answering those questions in the next few minutes.